New York's Department of Financial Services is continuing to fight with federal banking regulators over the right to regulate fintechs here in the United States. And just last week, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency filed an appeal in circuit court of a federal district court win that the DFS had had over the OCC. So today I'm going to talk about this ongoing fight between the New York Department of Financial Services and banking regulators and talk about what this means both for fintechs and for banks in the United States. In the US, each of the 50 states have the right to regulate businesses that operate within that state. And that can be a huge hassle for companies because they have to comply with regulations promulgated by 50 different regulators potentially. Now, banks don't have to deal with this because they're regulated by one national regulator and they have to follow those national regulations. But fintech companies such as marketplace lenders and payments companies are stuck having to comply with the regulations that are promulgated by each of the different 50 states. And that can be a huge hassle because sometimes the regulations are different and sometimes even regulations that are very similar are interpreted in different ways. So back in 2018, the OCC tried to solve this problem by announcing that it would be issuing a new national charter for fintechs. And this was great news for fintech companies. They were tremendously excited because they wouldn't have to follow all these different regulations by states like New York. But New York said, not so fast, and sued the OCC over the right to issue those special charters for fintech companies. So far, New York's DFS has been winning its fight with the OCC. Last May, a district court entered a decision holding that the OCC doesn't have the authority to issue charters to non-depository institutions like fintech companies. And then later last year, the court entered a final judgment precluding the OCC from issuing these special fintech charters anywhere in the United States. So this was a huge win for the DFS, but obviously a big disappointment for a lot of fintech companies that were hoping to solve the 50-state problem and just be subject to one regulator like the OCC. In its appeal filed last week, the OCC basically makes three arguments. So first of all, they argue that the dispute between the DFS and the OCC isn't yet ripe. And this is basically just a legal term, in this case meaning that because no New York fintech companies have yet applied for these OCC fintech charters, the DFS shouldn't be able to sue the OCC over it. And this would really just kick the problem down the road, because at some point a fintech company would apply for the charter and a district court would then rule on whether or not the OCC was allowed to issue it. The second argument is more substantive. And in the second argument, the OCC argues that the district court should have deferred to the OCC's interpretation of the National Bank Act. And of course, the OCC interprets the National Bank Act as giving it authority to issue the fintech charters. And the third argument is basically, even if we lose, the OCC argues we should only lose in New York. So when the district court ruled that the OCC was precluded from issuing fintech charters in any of the 50 states, that should be modified and the ruling should just be limited to New York. And that would allow the OCC to fight it out in all of the different 50 states with all of the different 50 regulators. So it looks like fintech companies are going to continue to deal with confusion and uncertainty for a while. First of all, the Second Circuit isn't going to decide the current appeal until later this year or possibly even early next year. Second of all, even that decision by the Second Circuit could itself be appealed. And third, even when this appeal is resolved, and even when this overall litigation between DFS and the OCC is resolved, that won't stop other states from challenging the OCC's interpretation of the National Bank Act and seeking to stop the OCC from issuing these fintech charters. And so this leaves fintech companies in a difficult spot. They still have to deal with this 50-state problem. And hopefully this will get resolved, whether it's by the courts or by banking regulators in the near future, because right now it is putting fintech companies in the United States at a competitive disadvantage with fintech companies that are based in other countries where they only have to deal with one set of regulations and one regulator.